Winter arrived earlier that year. It wasn't announced by the news or predicted by meteorologists. It simply fell over the northern mountains like a silent sentence. The snow began thin, almost delicate, but within a few hours it turned roads into white scars and the sky into a leaden lid that seemed to weigh down on everything beneath it. It was in this setting that Ethan Caldwell was driving. His hands gripped the steering wheel with excessive force, as if he were trying to maintain control not only of the car, but of something inside himself. The vehicle moved slowly along the winding road, flanked by tall, motionless pine trees, trees that seemed to watch their passage with an ancient, unsettling attention. In the passenger seat, Margaret stared straight ahead. The silence between them was dense, broken only by the constant sound of tires crushing fresh snow. In the back seat, little Noah, 8 years old, held a worn doll tightly to his chest and watched the fogged-up window, where shadows moved strangely every time the road curved. Noah hadn't slept for hours. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the same place. A building too large to be there, too old to still exist. Windows dark as empty eyes, and behind them, something watching. "Are we almost there?" he asked, his voice low, almost a whisper. Ethan took a deep breath before answering. "No, we're close." Margaret turned to her son and forced a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "It'll be beautiful there, Noah. A quiet place, silence, snow, no city noise." Noah didn't reply. He knew silence didn't always mean peace. White Hollow Lodge appeared on the horizon like an apparition. At first, just a dark outline in the mist. Then, as the car approached, the building revealed itself completely. An imposing structure of dark stone and weathered wood, standing in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by miles of forest and frozen mountains. It was too big, and too old. The place didn't seem abandoned, but it didn't seem alive either. The windows reflected the gray sky with no sign of light inside. The main entrance was marked by heavy double wooden doors, carved with floral symbols worn away by time. Noah felt his stomach tighten. He had been there before. Not physically, of that he was certain. But in his dreams, in the dreams that came with a metallic taste in his mouth and the strange sensation of being watched by something that knew his name. The car stopped in front of the entrance. The silence that followed was absolute. No wind, no birds, not even the distant crack of the forest. The lodge seemed to be holding its breath. "Welcome to White Hollow," Ethan murmured, more to himself than to the others. They stepped out of the car. The cold bit into their skin immediately, cutting through clothes and bone. Margaret wrapped her coat tighter, while Noah instinctively moved closer to his mother. The door opened before Ethan could knock. A tall, thin man with graying hair and pale eyes waited on the other side. He wore an old-fashioned overcoat and held an electric lantern, even though it was still daytime. "Mr. Caldwell," he said, with a voice that was too polite. "We were expecting you." Ethan hesitated. "We were?" The man smiled almost imperceptibly. "We always know when our caretakers arrive." His name was Arthur Bellows, the lodge's administrator. As they walked through the wide, silent corridors, he explained with rehearsed naturalness the routine of the place during winter. White Hollow closes completely between November and March. Heavy snowstorms, no guests, no visitors, no contact with the outside world except for the emergency radio. "And no one else stays here?" she asked. Arthur shook his head. "Only you." Their footsteps echoed too loudly in the long corridor, decorated with old carpets and paintings depicting winter landscapes, and people who looked too rigid, painted eyes that seemed to follow anyone who passed. Noah stopped in front of one of them. It was an old portrait of a smiling family standing in front of the lodge. A man, a woman, and a child. The child looked exactly like him. Noah felt his heart race. "Mom," he said, tugging at Margaret's coat. She knelt beside him. "What is it?" Noah pointed at the painting. "That's me?" Margaret glanced quickly and laughed nervously. "Of course not. It just looks like you, sweetheart." But Arthur, watching from a distance, tilted his head slightly. "White Hollow has a curious habit of recognizing its guests," he said. "Especially the more sensitive ones." His gaze rested on Noah for a second longer than it should have. Ethan cleared his throat. "Can we see our quarters?" Arthur nodded. "Of course. You'll be staying in the West Wing." It's more secluded. As they climbed the main staircase, Noah felt that uneasy sensation again, as if something were slowly awakening, recognizing his presence. When they passed a closed door at the end of the hallway, Noah heard a sound, a whisper. It didn't come from outside. It didn't come from anyone there. It came from inside the lodge. "Noah," the voice whispered, drawn out, distant. "You came back." He covered his ears. "Mom, someone's talking to me." Margaret stopped, alarmed. "What did you say?" Arthur smiled, far too calmly. "It's normal. The silence here can play tricks on the mind, especially on children." But Noah knew. That voice wasn't imagination. It was memory, and White Hollow, buried beneath decades of snow, isolation, and forgotten tragedies, had just opened its eyes once more. And this time, it didn't intend to let them go. The first night at White Hollow was marked by a silence that felt artificial. It wasn't the natural silence of snow muffling the world, nor the ordinary rest of an isolated place. It was a silence that pressed against the ears, making every breath sound too loud, every heartbeat feel like an inconvenient noise. Ethan stayed awake for hours, lying in the bed that was too large, staring at the dark wooden ceiling. The old beams creaked from time to time as if the building were adjusting to their presence, or stretching after a long sleep. Beside him, Margaret slept poorly, tossing and turning, murmuring disconnected words. Her face held a tension that even extreme exhaustion couldn't erase. In the next room, Noah wasn't sleeping either. He sat on the bed, clutching his doll so tightly his fingers hurt. The light from the bedside lamp cast long shadows on the walls, shadows that seemed to move on their own when he blinked. Ever since he lay down, something had felt wrong. The air in the room was colder than in the rest of the wing, and there was a smell, old. Not mold or dust, but something metallic, like rust mixed with stagnant water. Noah heard a sound, a faint dragging noise. It came from the hallway. He held his breath. The sound repeated. Slow, uneven footsteps, as if someone were walking without hurry, without a clear destination. With each step, the wooden floor creaked in a rhythm that didn't feel human. "Mom," he whispered. No answer. The sound stopped in front of his bedroom door. The silence that followed was so heavy, Noah felt like crying. Then, 3 soft knocks. They weren't aggressive. They weren't insistent. They were polite. "Who's there?" he asked, his voice breaking. On the other side of the door, someone breathed. A slow, deep sound, as if the lungs were filled with air that was far too cold. "Noah," the voice said. "Open the door." He recognized the tone. Not the voice itself, but the intention behind it. It was the same as in the dreams. The same that called to him when he was awake but pretended to sleep. "No," he replied, almost crying. "Go away." There was a pause. Then footsteps slowly moved away down the corridor. Noah stayed frozen for what felt like an eternity, until he finally got up and ran to his parents' room. Ethan opened the door, still groggy, irritation on his face. "What is it now, Noah?" The boy entered without asking and crawled between them. "Someone knocked on my door." Margaret sat up immediately. "Who?" "I don't know. But they knew my name." Ethan sighed, rubbing his face. "You had a nightmare. This place is strange, I know, but I was awake," Noah insisted. "And it wasn't a dream." Margaret shot a worried look at her husband. "Maybe we should leave his door open tonight." Ethan hesitated. Something inside him wanted to say no, something irrational, something he didn't fully understand. "All right," he said at last. "Just tonight." They tried to sleep again. But White Hollow didn't rest. The next morning, Ethan woke up with a throbbing headache, an uncomfortable pressure behind his eyes, as if he had drunk too much the night before, something he had been trying to avoid for months. He got up and went to the bathroom. The mirror was fogged, even though the shower hadn't been used. When he wiped the glass with his hand, he felt the strange sensation that his reflection took a fraction of a second longer to mimic him. He blinked, pushing the thought away. "Exhaustion," he muttered. In the hallway, he ran into Arthur Bellows, who looked as if he had been awake for hours. "Did you sleep well?" Arthur asked with a neutral smile. "More or less," Ethan replied. My son heard noises last night. Arthur tilted his head slightly. The lodge is old. Wood shifts in the cold. He heard a voice, Margaret added, appearing behind her husband. Arthur smiled a little wider. Children have vivid imaginations, especially in places like this. Places like this? Ethan asked. Isolated, Arthur replied. Loneliness amplifies everything. Fears, thoughts, desires. The way he pronounced the last word made Ethan shiver. After breakfast, Arthur explained Ethan's duties as winter caretaker. Heater checks, basic maintenance, inspection of restricted areas. There are parts of the lodge that remain locked, he said, handing him a ring of keys. For safety. Ethan weighed the metal in his hand. Safety from what? Arthur took a second longer than necessary to respond. From accidents. While Ethan explored the lower corridors, Noah walked with Margaret through the main wing. The lodge seemed larger in daylight, but no more welcoming. The light entering through the windows only highlighted cracks in the walls, old stains on the carpets, marks that looked scrubbed or dragged. Noah stopped suddenly. Did you hear that? Hear what? Margaret asked, laughing. She heard nothing, but Noah was certain. A low, distant laugh coming from somewhere above them. They passed by a closed double door with an old crooked sign hanging from it. North Hall, closed to the public. Noah felt his head throb. Images began flashing through his mind, fast and disordered. People dancing, old music, glasses shattering. A sudden scream. He staggered. Noah! Margaret grabbed him before he fell. Don't go through there, he murmured. They don't like it. Who? She asked. But Noah no longer responded. His gaze was distant, as if he were watching something that didn't exist there. Or that existed, but not now. That night, horror took its first concrete step. Ethan was in the basement, checking the heating system, when he heard something fall behind him. A heavy metallic sound. He turned quickly. Nothing. The corridor was empty. He went back to work, trying to ignore the growing sensation of being watched. Then he heard a sound that made his stomach twist. A glass being filled, an impossible sound in that place. He followed the noise to a door he was certain had been locked before. Now it was open. On the other side was a bar. It wasn't on any blueprint Arthur had shown him. A polished counter, bottles lined up, glasses far too clean for a place closed for months. Behind the bar stood a man. He wore an old, elegant suit and smiled like a long-lost friend. Good evening, Mr. Caldwell, he said, pouring a generous measure of whiskey. We've been expecting you. Ethan felt his throat go dry. That's not possible. The man slid the glass toward him. Nothing here is impossible, just forgotten. The smell of alcohol hit Ethan like a painful memory. His body reacted before his mind. I quit, he said, forcing the words out. I don't drink anymore. The man tilted his head. They all say that at first. And for the first time since arriving at White Hollow, Ethan felt he wasn't merely visiting the place. He felt that the place knew him and accepted him, with everything he was, with everything he could still become. The bar vanished when Ethan blinked. One moment there was low music, warm light reflecting off the glass bottles, and the unmistakable smell of old alcohol. The next he was alone in an empty, dust-covered room, with broken shelves and a counter rotted by time. The glass that had been in front of him no longer existed, only the distant echo of something that sounded like a satisfied laugh. Ethan took a step back, his heart pounding wildly. He murmured, "It's not real," but his hands were shaking. He left the basement in silence, avoiding looking to the sides, with the constant sensation that if he turned his head too quickly, he would see someone standing right behind him. When he reached the bedroom, Margaret was sitting on the bed, awake, hugging her knees. "Where were you?" she asked. "Working," he replied, too quickly. She stared at him for a few seconds. "You smell like alcohol." Ethan felt his stomach drop. "That's impossible," he said. "I didn't drink anything." The "but" part of him wasn't so sure. Next morning, Noah woke up with blood on his nose. It didn't hurt. He hadn't even noticed when it happened. He only felt something warm running down his face as he stared at the ceiling, where shadows formed figures that seemed to writhe slowly. Margaret panicked when she saw him. "Has this happened before?" she asked, cleaning her son's face. Noah shook his head. It happens when they talk too loud. Who talks, Noah? He took a moment to answer. The ones who stayed. Margaret felt a chill crawl up her spine. While Ethan handled tasks outside, clearing snow that had already reached nearly half a meter, Noah began drawing compulsively. Page after page filled with images he didn't remember consciously thinking of. Endless corridors, numbered doors, faceless people, and always the lodge at the center of everything, like a living organism. In one of the drawings, there was a family. The father held something heavy in his hands. The mother lay on the floor. The child stood watching, motionless with completely black eyes. Margaret tried to hide the paper, but Noah was already watching her. "This already happened," he said, with a calmness that didn't match his age. "Many times." "What?" she whispered. "The winner, the father, the lodge keeping them." Arthur Bellows reappeared that afternoon, emerging into the lobby as if he had never left. He watched Noah draw without interrupting, until the boy looked up and said. Arthur smiled, but his eyes didn't follow the gesture. "No." "What happened to the others?" The administrator walked slowly to the window and watched the snow fall. "White Hollow was built to be a refuge," he began, "a place where important people came to forget who they really were. But forgetting has a price." "What price?" Margaret asked. Arthur turned toward her. "The lodge doesn't create monsters. It merely removes what keeps them asleep." The silence that followed was heavy. "There were other families?" she insisted. Arthur nodded. "Mostly winter caretakers. Men who came here to start over. Writers, musicians, failed businessmen, men tired of themselves." Margaret felt her stomach twist. "And what happened to them?" Arthur answered with another question. "Do you believe places can remember?" That night, Noah decided not to run from the voices. When he woke to the whispers, he sat up in bed and closed his eyes. The headache came hard, as if something were pressing against his mind from the inside, but he didn't retreat. The images came. He saw the lodge decades earlier, full of life, parties, laughter, music. He saw men in suits and women in long dresses dancing in the North Hall. He saw children running through the corridors, ignored by the adults. Then the images darkened. Screams replaced laughter. Doors slammed shut. A man, deranged, dragged something heavy down a corridor. A woman cried, begged. A child hid inside a closet, covering their mouth to keep from making a sound. The pattern repeated. Always winter, always isolation, always a father convinced he was doing something necessary. Noah opened his eyes, gasping. "She wants to keep us," he whispered to the empty room. "She wants to keep you," corrected the voice, now closer. "You hear. You see. You remember." Noah turned slowly. A figure stood near the door. It had no defined shape, only a human outline filled with darkness and fragments of faces that appeared and vanished. "I don't want to," Noah said, tears streaming down his face. "They never do," the thing replied. "But they always stay." Ethan began to change, not all at once, not in any obvious way. It was subtle. He talked to himself while working. He laughed at inappropriate moments. He grew irritated by small things, especially Noah. The sound of his son's voice seemed to bother him, like a constant buzzing, and at night he returned to the basement. The bar was always there now. The man in the suit welcomed him like an old friend. "Hard day?" he asked, pouring another drink. "They don't respect me," Ethan said, not realizing when he had started drinking. "They look at me like I'm weak." "You're not weak," the man replied. "You're just surrounded by people who don't understand what's necessary." The words seeped into Ethan's mind like slow poison. In one corner of the bar, there was a mirror, and every time Ethan looked at it, the reflection seemed to smile before he did. Margaret found the records by accident. In the old office, behind a false bookshelf, there were boxes filled with documents, newspapers, and photographs. All of them spoke of White Hollow. All of them spoke of tragedies treated as accidents, psychotic breaks, inexplicable fires, entire families dead, always in winter, always with the father as the responsible party. And in every photograph there was something strange. In the background, in the windows, in the mirrors, the same silhouette. Margaret felt panic take solid form inside her. The lodge wasn't merely haunted, it was hungry. And Ethan, was being prepared. The snowstorm began that dawn and never stopped. The emergency radio hissed with constant static. No response. No voice on the other end. The roads were completely buried, and even if they hadn't been, no one could have driven through that white hell. White Hollow was sealed. Margaret noticed the change in Ethan definitively that morning. He was sitting at the kitchen table, staring at a blank wall for several minutes. When she called his name, he didn't respond. Only after she touched his shoulder did he blink, as if returning from very far away. "Are you okay?" she asked. Ethan smiled. It was the wrong kind of smile. Tight, forced. "I've never been better." Noah, sitting in the corner, watched his father in silence. The boy's eyes looked older, far too tired for someone his age. "They're getting louder," Noah said suddenly. "What?" Margaret asked. "The voices. They're in a hurry." Ethan slammed his hand on the table. "Enough of this nonsense," he shouted. "This place is messing with your heads." Margaret stood up, startled. "Ethan, you're scaring Noah." He took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. "Sorry," he muttered. "I just need silence." Silence. That was exactly what the lodge offered when it wanted to. That afternoon, Margaret decided to confront Arthur Bellows. She found him in the main lobby, standing in front of the cold fireplace like a statue. "You knew," she said bluntly. "You knew what happens here." Arthur didn't turn around. "I knew something like this could happen," he replied. "But every winter is different. My husband is being manipulated." "Your husband is being remembered," Arthur corrected. "White Hollow forces no one. It merely removes distractions." Margaret felt anger boil over. "And the children," she shouted. "They don't have a choice." Arthur finally turned to face her. "Some children are born with the ability to hear what adults ignore. Those are special to the lodge." "You're saying my son is a sacrifice?" "No," Arthur replied calmly. "A guardian." That same night, Ethan dreamed while awake. He walked through the lodge's corridors, but everything was different. Clean, bright. People passed by him, well-dressed, smiling. No one seemed to notice him. He entered the North Hall. Music echoed loudly, old jazz, lively. People danced, toasted, laughed. The man from the bar was there, watching him with pride. "See," he said, "this place was once magnificent. It can be again." Ethan felt something heavy in his hands, a cold object. When he looked down, he saw a maintenance hammer, stained with something dark. "What did I do?" he asked, confused. "What needed to be done?" replied the voice, now multiple, coming from all sides. "So the lodge could survive." Ethan woke with his heart racing. The hammer was beside the bed. Margaret was locked in the bathroom. "Ethan," she called from the other side of the door. "What's happening to you?" He didn't answer, not because he didn't want to, but because something inside him was savoring that moment. The first act of violence happened without planning. Margaret was trying to turn on the radio once again when Ethan entered the room. He watched her for a few seconds, as if seeing a stranger. "You want to leave?" he said. "Yes," she answered without hesitation. "Before it's too late." Ethan's face hardened. "The lodge won't let us." He advanced. Margaret barely escaped, running through the corridors as her screams echoed through the walls. The sound seemed to excite the place. Lights flickered. Doors closed on their own, redirecting her path. Noah felt everything. Every step. Every violent thought of his father. "He's not just him anymore," the boy said to himself. "They're using him." He ran to the old lodge map, the one he had seen in his visions. He knew where he had to go, the outside maze. The chase intensified. Ethan walked with the hammer in his hand, breathing heavily, eyes wide. He no longer looked afraid. He looked determined. "There's no point running," he shouted. "This is bigger than us." Margaret tripped and fell. The impact was hard, pain exploding in her knee. When she looked up, Ethan was only a few meters away, hammer raised. Before he could advance, something caught his attention. Noah stood at the end of the corridor. "Dad," the boy said, his voice far too steady. "She doesn't want you. She wants me." Ethan hesitated. For a moment, something human crossed his face. "Noah, come here." The boy didn't move. "If you take me, she'll leave you alone." he continued. That's how it always happens. Margaret screamed. Don't listen to him. But the lodge had already decided. The walls seemed to close in. The lights went out one by one. Ethan took a step forward, then another. And in that moment, Noah ran. Out into the cold. Into the maze covered in snow that surrounded White Hollow like an ancient symbol of loss and repetition. Ethan followed. The lodge watched. Satisfied. The maze felt larger at night. The hedge walls, tall and uneven, were coated with thick snow that muffled all sound. The wind howled through the narrow corridors, creating long, distorted wails, like trapped voices trying to escape. Noah ran without looking back. He knew that place. Not because he had been there before, but because the lodge had shown it to him dozens of times. In dreams. In visions. In fragments of memory that weren't his. His feet sank into the snow. The air burned his lungs. But he kept going. Every turn was a choice between living or disappearing. Behind him, Ethan advanced. He didn't run. He walked with determination, the hammer hanging from his hand, hitting his leg with every step. His eyes were fixed on his son, not with hatred, with something worse. Conviction. Noah. His voice echoed through the maze. You don't understand. This is our place. The boy stopped briefly, hiding behind a sharp turn. He controlled his breathing, remembering what he had seen in his visions. They follow footprints. He pressed his feet into the snow, walking backward for a few meters, then slipped into a side corridor, rubbing his hands against the hedge walls to erase the tracks. The lodge felt it. The wind intensified. The cold grew, sharper. It didn't like being deceived. Margaret reached the maze entrance limping, gasping for breath, her knee throbbing. The iron gate stood half open, creaking in the wind. Noah! She shouted. Ethan! No answer. She entered anyway, knowing it was a mistake. The maze seemed to move. Corridors led to dead ends, turns she didn't remember seeing before. Snow fell harder, covering recent tracks within minutes. Despair rose in Margaret's chest. Please, she whispered. Let us go. The answer came as memory. She saw flashes that weren't hers. Women running, children crying, men screaming in rage and confusion. Always there. Always in the same place. White Hollow didn't hunt bodies. It hunted stories. At the center of the maze, Ethan stopped. The silence there was absolute, almost reverent. The cold felt less intense, as if the place were shielded from the outside world. Voices began to rise around him. They didn't shout. They whispered. You did well. They don't understand. You were chosen. Ethan closed his eyes. For a moment he felt peace. He saw himself not as a failed man, but as someone important, necessary, part of something that crossed generations. When he opened his eyes, Noah stood before him. Dad, the boy said, tears freezing on his face. There's still time. Ethan stepped forward. You were always special, he said. They need you. I do too. Noah shook his head. They only need you to kill, he replied. After that, they forget you. The voices grew louder, irritated. Liar. He's afraid. Finish it. Ethan raised the hammer. The wind surged, making the hedge walls tremble. Noah closed his eyes and focused. He opened his mind completely. Everything came at once. The lodge's origin. The first winter. The first man who lost his sanity there. The lies. The cover-ups. The erased records. The cycle fed on the same pattern because it worked. But something was different. Noah wasn't just seeing. He was being seen. The lodge hesitated. Ethan felt it. What are you doing? He shouted, confused. Remembering, Noah replied. Everything. The voices overlapped, disorganized. No, he can't. He'll break the silence. The ground trembled slightly. Snow began to fall into the maze as if the sky itself were collapsing. Ethan grabbed his head, screaming. Stop, he yelled. Stop this. Noah slowly backed away. You don't have to be this, he said. But she needs you to be. Margaret appeared in the opposite corridor, leaning against the hedge wall. Ethan, she shouted. Look at me. He turned. For a second, he recognized her. Then the hammer fell from his hand. The sound echoed far too loudly. The voices fell silent. Ethan dropped to his knees, struggling to breathe. The cold began to overcome him quickly. His hands trembled. His body lost strength. The lodge realized it too late. Without the final act, the cycle was incomplete. The wind rose violently. Snow covered Ethan within minutes. His eyes slowly closed, and for the first time since arriving at White Hollow, he looked afraid, not of death, but of being forgotten. Margaret pulled Noah into her arms, crying. "We're leaving," she said. "Now." The maze opened a path, reluctant, wounded, but open. They ran without looking back. Behind them, White Hollow screamed in silence. The storm ceased at dawn, not gradually as nature usually does, but abruptly, like someone had simply decided snow was no longer necessary. The sky remained heavy and gray, but the wind had vanished completely. Margaret and Noah walked along the icy road without speaking. The silence between them wasn't empty. It was filled with everything that didn't need to be said. Each step took them farther from White Hollow, yet the feeling of being watched lingered, like a shadow stretching even without sunlight. After hours of walking, they encountered a rescue vehicle advancing slowly along the newly cleared road. Authorities arrived too late to prevent the tragedy, but early enough to retrieve the survivors. When asked about Ethan Caldwell, Margaret said only, "He got lost in there." No one pressed further. White Hollow always produced answers like that. The lodge was officially closed months later. A technical report cited irreversible structural damage, environmental risks, and a concerning history. None of those words came close to the truth, but they served their purpose. Arthur Bellows disappeared. His name appeared in no official records. There was no birth certificate, no contract, no recent photograph. Only vague mentions in old documents, always associated with temporary administration of the lodge, as if he had never been a person, as if he were merely a function. Noah was never the same. The visions faded over time, but never disappeared completely. Sometimes he woke in the middle of the night, staring at nothing, silent tears streaming down his face. Margaret learned not to ask. They moved often. Small towns brought memories. Big cities brought noise that couldn't drown out what he heard inside. One night, years later, Noah, now a teenager, found a forgotten box at the back of a closet. Inside were old drawings. His drawings, the maze, the lodge, the North Hall, and one image he didn't remember making. A hand-drawn photograph. Men and women smiling at the camera, dressed in clothing from another era, gathered in a grand hall. In the background of the image, almost imperceptible, stood a man with his face partially hidden by shadow. His father, younger, wearing an old suit. In the lower corner of the image, a date, 1954. Noah closed the box carefully. In that moment, he understood what White Hollow truly was. Not a place, but an accumulation of moments, of repeated choices, of people who never fully managed to leave. Years later, the road leading to the lodge was reopened for a new venture, a modern winter resort, free of the past. Construction began in the summer. On the first day, a worker found something strange in the basement, buried beneath old snow. A body, frozen, seated against the wall, as if it had accepted its fate. The report stated the man appeared to have died decades earlier. No one could explain that. Among the debris, they also found an old photograph, perfectly preserved. It showed an elegant party in the North Hall. At the center of the image, smiling discreetly at the camera, stood Ethan Caldwell. The date on the back of the photo didn't correspond to any known event, but the lodge recognized its guests. It always had. That same night, in a distant city, Noah woke abruptly, his heart racing, a metallic taste in his mouth. He heard something, very far away, like a calling. Noah sat up in bed, staring into the darkness of his room, and for the first time in many years he answered in a low voice, "I remember." And somewhere beneath the snow, White Hollow smiled.